Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Booklinks Award for Children's Historical Fiction with the announcement of, well, get to meet all the wonderful shortlisted people, and then we will announce who the winner was, although you're all winners if you make it to the shortlist. So I'd like to welcome everybody and acknowledge that I'm hosting this event from the lands of the Jagera, Yugara and Yugarabal people. And I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands from which you are joining us today, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in the session. So I think I know them all. So last year, the year before, 2 years ago, Booklinks introduced a new award, the Booklinks Award for Children's Historical Fiction. And we looked at awards around the country, felt that there was nothing being offered for historical fiction. We wanted to celebrate outstanding works of fiction that excel at increasing the awareness and developing an understanding of the history in children. So I will start now by asking Mia. I'm going to introduce Mia McCrossan. So Mia is the managing editor of Storylinks, a teacher librarian and children's book editor. She's a former CBCA Children's Book of the Year judge, an Aurealis judge, and a Queensland Literary Awards judge, and the coordinator of the Booklinks Historical Fiction Award. She founded the last Tuesday Children's Book Club for adults who love to read and discuss children's books. And she reviews for Magpies, Reading Time, 4MBS Radio, and of course, Storylinks. So also many thanks to those judges for giving their time and expertise, and to the authors and publishers for giving us the stories. So let's hear now from Mia.
Right, can you hear me now? Thank you, Jenny.
Yep.
And good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always exciting when, when you get to this point after you've read so many books and had so many discussions, and you get to this point. It's always wonderful. I just wanted to talk very briefly, why an award for historical fiction. And I don't know if anyone's read Jerome de Groot's work. He's from the University of Manchester in England. And he said a few words which really resonated with me. And he was sort of talking about, he says historical fiction should be more than just entertainment. Well, I think for a children's book, it does have to be entertaining. You do have to keep those children engaged. But with historical fiction, you see, and children can learn this, they can see an unfolding of certain moral and ethical elements. They get an awareness that the events of history have an impact on contemporary life. They, in a sense, they can forge a live connection between then and now. All this sort of stuff is happening in their minds as they read some of these wonderful books. They learn to contemplate social change. They get an awareness of social change. It's also an important aspect, I think, where readers learn about marginal places and marginal people. They can hear and learn about dissident or dissenting accounts of the past. They can learn about extremes of human behaviour. And so I suppose in all these ways you can say it helps us to retain the past. And I think that's important. But I think the thing about a novel is, and I'm quoting E.L. Doctorow here, the historian will tell you what happened, but a novelist will tell you what it felt like. And I think that's the important thing. So we've got 4 fabulous titles here, and Jenny's going to show us the books. Oh, well, The Unstoppable Flying Flanagan. What a terrific title, by the way. I'm not going to read out the comments. I'm hoping that people will do that for themselves. Thank you, Jenny. Those are the 4 books that we put on the shortlist. And I'm now going to ask the judges, the other judges, and I'll introduce them. And we're going to ask the authors some questions. First, Annalise Bird is an avid reader. She really reads a lot. And her debut middle grade novel, it's a humorous portal fantasy. It's not a historical novel, called Losing the Plot, is going to be published by Walker Books next year. She works for the Ipswich District Teacher Librarian Network and as a social media coordinator for Storylinks. We love her to death. She lives in Brisbane with her husband, 2 young sons, and apparently she's now got a rescue greyhound with the most perfect name, Mia. So that's Annalise. Where are you? She's there. Hey. And we also have Sarah Custance. You know, our judges this year are just absolutely inveterate readers. She's read everything. She's a library technician who's been working in schools, and she does a lot of reviews for Storylinks. If you ever go to the site, you'll see a lot of her work. She also judged children's books for the Aurealis Award, and her passion for children's literature has led her to involvement. And, you know, she works on committees, projects, and always aim towards improving and promoting a love of books for all children. So where is Sarah? Is she there? She sent me, she is. I can't see her, but anyway, I'm hoping she's there. Good. Okay, yes. Now we're going in alphabetical order. So Felice, I'm glad I worked out how to pronounce your name.
You say it beautifully, Mia. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, one of the things I always find interesting about characters in historical novels is, you know, how do you get, as a reader, you can't get rid of your own, you know, you are of your time, but when you're reading a historical novel, the characters have to be in period. They can't be modern people in old funny dresses. I know in your case, it was only 1945. So that's my question. How do you make sure that your characters are in period?
Well, it comes through dialogue. Language changes through the generations. So it does come through dialogue. And I in the first draft, usually when I'm writing the first draft, I'm not so worried about that in the beginning. I just want to get down what the emotions are all about for each character. But then by the time I come to the second or possibly the third or fourth draft, I make sure that I might even just research when did that word come into play, into our language. Is it used a lot? I often show kids when I go into schools as well, the type of names that were around in 1942 Melbourne. And, you know, you can see that some of those names have come back again. Yes. Jack and George and Henry and Harry, they're all back again for the boys. Some, although I was at a school where there were so many Jadens, and they said, well, why not Jaden? And I said, well, Jaden didn't come into circulation until like the late 80s. So I suppose that would take the reader out of reading something and be a little jarring if you read Jaden. Yes. Harry, George and Jaden might not seem right at the time. So I give examples with names as well from that time.
Oh, that's excellent. And what about things like dress and expressions? I mean, do they?
That comes from, I always say you feel like a detective when you're doing all that hard work, historical research, and the research is hard work. It takes up the most time when you're writing a historical fiction. You've got to look at the photographs, the old photographs, old clues. I was writing one of my other historical novels set in Paris with Fearless Frederick. My editor came back and said, "You have a guard at the Louvre Museum. What's he wearing?" And I said, "I don't know what would he be wearing in 1910? I have no idea what guards at the museum in 1910 would wear." And I took months trying to find out and looking through old photographs. And then I found an old painting from that era. And there was an interior painting of the Louvre, and there was a guard right at the back, and I had to zoom in and enlarge and have a look at that. So you do put on your detective cap to try to find these things out.
Oh, it sounds like a lot of fun, actually.
Yeah, well, it takes up a lot of time, and before you realise that you haven't written anything, because you just keep reading other things, and it leads you to something else.
Okay, well, over to Anna now for her questions.
Sure. So while you were doing all of this research, what is something you learnt that particularly intrigued or surprised you? And did you learn anything that truly shocked you?
I start off with in the first scene of the book. I was surprised that after Darwin was bombed, a week later, the Japanese flew right over Melbourne. And they kept that secret from the public right until the late 50s. And even today, many Australians wouldn't even know that. They did a recce trip from a submarine out in the middle of Bass Strait, just north of Tasmania, and flew right over the top of Melbourne. And people claimed to see it, but they wouldn't believe them. They didn't believe them. They said, no, we would have heard something. The Army, the RAAF would have said something, but they didn't. They kept it secret. So I was surprised by that. But that made for a great start.
Yes.
The story of Unstoppable Flying Flanagan. Another thing I was shocked about, or not so much shocked, was that when the boys came back from fighting and the girls and the women were playing their sports and their jobs, they wanted them back and they had no say really. And I thought with that momentum and that shift for women, I thought could you imagine if they had their own, they were allowed to have their football leagues and they were desperate to have their football leagues starting from the 40s, where would we be today if that had happened? And kids find that hard to believe. They think women in sport started like 5 years ago. It's a modern day thing, but it isn't.
No,
Right.
that's true.
Thank
Sarah,
you.
jump in. Where is Sarah?
Sarah.
Yeah, I'm over here. My
Yes,
internet
Sarah.
does seem to be a bit shaky, so excuse me if I drop out.
Sure.
So throughout the book, there's so many uses of different sort of breaking of the gender stereotypes, even for back then. You've got sort of the obvious one of the girls shouldn't be able to drive or play football or do the billy cart races. But
Yeah.
then you also have really lovely characters. Was it Gerald? Yeah, Gerald. And my favorite, who was the female shopkeeper, who was so lonely living with her best friend.
Yes, well, that's what society thought, right?
And they were going, oh, the poor spinster. And she was going, she seems quite happy, actually.
Yeah, exactly. And Gerald was a delight to write. Here's the thing, I grew up in country Victoria where I love sport and you had to know sport as a language to get on with others and find your way. But I also loved theatre and dance. And the fact is, because I was good at one sport, I didn't get so much ribbing from my mates, but I really wanted to perform as well. And I thought you can have both. And if you don't have both, why not? And the 40s was so rich in terms of the arts and music and the movies that were coming out of Hollywood at the time. I really wanted to capture that through the eyes of Gerald. So he was your song and dance boy. And yeah, he appreciated footy, but I didn't want him to be a sad character. He had this zest for life. He loved it. And he was a great ally I wanted someone to support Maggie throughout it.
And he definitely was. He was a great person for that.
Yeah.
So much fun and life into the book.
He could really have his own spin-off series. Or
Absolutely.
Yes, that'd be a good idea. But thank you, Felice. We're
Thank you,
now
Lynn.
going to
Thank you.
call
Thank you,
upon,
Sarah.
do I say, Alison masquerading as Pamela. And my question for you is, Pamela, your books have such distinct main characters with their own personalities, quirks and flaws, obviously, all the main characters do. But I'm interested in the process for crafting that main character. And I always want to know, how do you know if it's a boy or a girl? I mean, does the boy or girl come first? Or is it, I want to write about a person who's obsessed with music? How does all that come about?
Mm-hmm. So what she said is, to be honest, they tell me who they are. I start thinking about a main character and they appear. Their personalities, quirks and flaws develop as the story needs them to, and they're usually girls. I don't know why, though sometimes it's circumstance related. For example, another book, The Secret Battle, had to have a boy because I needed to have a character who would be out on the streets on a regular basis, and a newspaper boy was an obvious choice. For Interned, it needed to be a girl, Tilly, because at that time it would have been a girl who was expected to stay home and take care of her mother.
Ah,
Mm.
Thank you. Anna, do you have a question?
Yes. So Pamela clearly had a few options for how to finish this story. I'm wondering whether she knew all along what would happen to Greta and Tilly after the war, or whether she only made that decision at some stage during the writing process, and why she chose those particular outcomes for the girls.
Yeah. So I actually personally remember her raging about this. So, so she said, I always know what will happen at the end, even before I begin writing. Yes, I'm a control freak. I'm a plotter and have a chapter outline I work to. However, in this case, the ending isn't the one I planned. I had a very sad and, to my mind, quite logical ending, but other people weren't happy with it, and it needed to have some hope. So the ending was changed. Yes, I do remember her struggling with that, but it actually turned out really well in the end. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that it was felt that it had to have hope. I mean,
yeah.
was it such a, I'm dying to know what the other ending was. It must have been really bleak, because
it was pretty bleak. It was pretty bleak. Yeah.
I can imagine.
I have to admit, this is the second book that I have also tried to convince her to change the ending on. So maybe she should just listen to me more. No, but that's the thing. I think, you know, maybe you see the ending one way, and you know, everybody else weighs in. And I think, you know, at the end, she did say that, yes, that also worked. Both those endings worked well. Yeah.
Yes.
And she was fine with it in the end. Yeah.
So in this book, music plays such an important role, especially in the lives of Greta. Was this a very big, important thing to be adding to the book? And if so, why?
So she said, I knew I wanted Greta's character to have a very strong reason why she wanted out of internment and to get on what she'd sort of planned for her life. I looked for a talent that she was driven to progress. It could have been art, dance, or academic study, or perhaps sport. From my research, I knew the internment camp had a choir and an orchestra, so music it was, especially when I read a reference that an internee had made a violin out of metal. I knew I had a scene waiting to be written when I found that out.
I just can't imagine the violin made of metal. What would it have sounded like?
Better than nothing, I think, was the was the point. I think it was screechy or nothing, and I suppose they could be extremely inventive in a situation like that. Yeah.
I just realised that my alphabetizing is crazy.
I did wonder.
Yes, I'm sorry. My apologies. Katrina, you're next, and you chose to write about the Lebensborn program. Why pick something so scary and horrible?
I'd actually had written my first two historical novels about lesser known issues, with the Wolfskinder and a little child soldier serving in the Red Army. And I actually had a quite different idea planned for the next book, but my publisher said, oh, you know, you're on a roll now with these lesser known stories. I think maybe we need to do something else. And she said, I read this article the other day, and she flicked it over to me. And I just had a quick look at it while we were having a Zoom session together, and immediately my mind was off and running. It was such a hideously bizarre program for starters. Like, if I didn't read about it and do multiple readings of books, reading multiple books about it and seeing a whole heap of stuff, I would have thought it was made up. It's just so bizarre. But also it was just had so many layers to the story, so many potential big issues to explore, that I was hooked the minute my publisher just sent this one article, and I was off and running and researching. So it definitely captured my interest, and I thought there was plenty there to write a story about. The story I was planning on writing, I probably will write next, I think. I still like that story. It just didn't fit in with the trilogy sort of thing of the three lesser known stories.
Oh, thank you. I must admit, I think a lot more people know about the Lebensborn program now. Anna,
Yes, with so many difficult topics covered in Waiting for the Storks, what was the most surprisingly difficult thing to write about?
The whole program, the whole premise for the program is based on this belief that the Aryan race, so it's the whole program was based on racism, and I knew that from the start, and I wrote away. But I actually got to the end of writing, was at that sort of editing, reviewing sort of point of things where I just thought, oh my goodness, this is a horrendous thing to be writing about. And I had this moment at that point of the story, after I'd written most of it, where I struggled a little bit about, am I giving voice to something that shouldn't even be given voice to? You know, there's always that really difficult thing when, and I'm sure you, Felice, and Pamela and Claire would find this too. There are things you talk about in stories that you sort of need to mention to make the story full and honest, but also you want to make sure you're giving voice to it in a way that makes it really clear that it is so wrong and so immoral. And I think I got really scared about that, but I also felt a little bit sick about that as well. So I'm not sure whether that quite answers what you're asking about there, but I really did struggle with that and found that a hard balance all along, and particularly at that end point where you get a bit jittery anyway before it goes to print. I was worried about that.
Thank you.
Yes, very complex story. Sarah?
So sort of on the same lines of that hard to write aspect, the Zophia's adoptive family, I found them so intriguing in that they're supposed to be the bad people, but they actually have so much good in them still. And I know often as authors, you're told that your good characters need to be well-rounded and still have bad qualities. What was it like having to write sort of the other way around, of seemingly terrible characters with these wonderful good qualities about them?
I think I really wanted to make it clear that these people who were doing terrible things and making immoral choices could actually be quite likable, kind people. And I think that's the case in life, isn't it? Most people we meet are nice and they're charming and we can get on well with them, but it's those big choices that people make in life often that sort of put people on the villain or the hero sort of side of things. And I think too, I'd read so many accounts and continue to with my historical research of people who were really good parents, really good community members, and rabid Nazis who believed in all the terrible ideals that the Nazis believed in. And I think we're all these complex characters, each one of us. We have good and bad. And I really played a lot with the idea in the story about, well, at which point does someone tip over from being a normal person to being a hero or to being a villain? How much bad does it take before someone does become a villain? Or what are the big issues that are not negotiable if you're going to be considered a decent person? So I suppose that was a, sort of something I wanted to play with a bit in the story, and to make children aware that people are good and bad, and that even villains they're actually normal people, and they can do nice things and say nice things. They make horrendous choices. And I think, I'm probably waffling here, but I think a big part of that is I don't like it when we talk about, I think we often use the term that bad people, like the Nazi leaders who did horrendous things, are monsters, or that they were sick. And I think that almost justifies their behaviour, that they didn't have a choice, whereas I believe most people do have a choice and they just chose to go on the bad side of things. Does that
But that's thank you, Katrina, because making choices is one of the themes in your book, isn't it? It's a thread that runs through it. Well, we have Claire now. Claire, wrote that wonderful book, The Wearing of the Green, and I'm so grateful. I really enjoyed it, and I love the song. When did you first hear that Irish folk song, The Wearing of the Green, and what emotions or thoughts did the song evoke in you? Is there any Irish in your, sorry, personal question, is there any Irish in your heritage? What, and why did you pick it as a title? So there's a few
Okay.
questions. for
That's
you.
about, I'll try and keep hold of all those questions because there was a few there.
Sorry. yes.
The name of the song came, and as a title, came very late in the process.
Ah,
I tend to just call my manuscripts by the name of the main character, so that I'm not thinking about that. And so I got to the end and it was edited and it was ready. It needed a title, but I really struggled to find something that just encapsulated all I wanted it to say. And then I found this song, this Irish anthem, and which came from 1795, and it just for my character Biddy, she's a banner carrying Irish person without carrying a banner. She's just living her life. She's just trying to exist, and she's not even looking to thrive. She's just looking to survive. And there was something in that song which covered all of that. And it became the perfect choice. It just, the wearing of the green is not something that you wear on the outside. It's something that you wear on the inside. And her survival, even before she left Ireland, was so unlikely, really, in the circumstances, that it just helped me feel that I'd chosen the right sort of title for the energy and the resilience that she shows in the most awful situations that she finds herself.
yeah, the beginning of the book especially is quite harrowing, but very engaging. Yes, you're
Thank
really
you.
good. Anna.
Yes. What drove you to write about the plight of Irish teenagers in the 1850s, and what made this time period so interesting to write about?
I didn't originally set out to write about an Irish teenager who was shipped over here against her will, against her, it would have been her will. I wanted to write about the Melbourne that existed when the gold rush happened. I wanted to look at that period, that first early period of Melbourne's settlement between 1850 and 1860, when the population exploded tenfold. It just increased so much. But all the stories are told about the goldfields. They're not told about this city. And I wanted to think about this city, and I wanted to put a character in there. But it wasn't until I found Biddy and the Irish girls who were shipped out here as a convenient solution for a number of problems in Ireland and here, that I had my girl. And she just grew. Once I found those stories, the 22 shiploads of girls that were brought to Australia, then it was no hardship to build Biddy into my main character.
Thank you.
Sarah? Sarah? She's
frozen.
She's frozen. I've got Sarah's question here. Is she? I'm going to ask it for her.
I'm back up.
You're back? Good on you. Come on, Sarah.
Yeah, I'm back up. Yeah.
Good on-
All right. So while researching for this book, was there something in particular that really intrigued or surprised you? The main word being surprised, that you didn't know about beforehand, that you really just sort of, it stuck with you after writing it?
There was a lot that surprised me, but I think the thing that really surprised me in a shocking way was that the Earl Grey, who's sitting in Parliament, and yes, he is connected to the Earl Grey of Earl Grey tea, but it wasn't him who named the tea. He was sitting in Parliament and he was responsible for the colonies. And so that meant that he was responsible for Ireland and he was responsible for Australia. And I just see him sitting back saying, I know what we can do. Let's take the girls who are filling the spaces in the poorhouses and take them to Australia where we need servants and where we need wives. And it's the sort of thing that you could only make a decision about if you are physically removed from it and it doesn't affect you. And it shocks me to the core now that people played chess with the lives of others on this scale. And that stays with me all the time.
Mm.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I can think of a few modern examples, but we won't get political and anything at the moment. Thank you, Claire. Well, that's concludes the questions from the judges, and I'd now like to throw it open to questions from the audience. Over to you, Jenny.
Why to me? I don't
Well,
see.
I thought you've got all the questions, the people,
Well, I haven't seen any pop up in the chat room so far. So maybe if anybody in the chat room has some questions, you could put up your hand. Do you know the little raise hand in the reactions? And then we'll see you and you can unmute and ask a question. Got anything? No?
Oh.
No questions, Mia?
oh,
Melissa has one.
Comments? Oh, has
yes,
she? I
I
haven't
can
seen
see
a hand
this.
go up.
Yes.
Go on, Melissa.
Thank you. I'm just wondering what people think is key to capturing a period in history. What do you pull from that period to make it come alive?
Is your question can anyone answer that question?
Yeah, sorry. I'm happy to hear from any of the fabulous authors, if that's okay. But, if you want me to pick one, I can.
Who wants to jump in? What about Alison? She writes historical fiction.
That's a tricky question, isn't it? So I think for me, like I always springboard off something in particular that has particularly interested me or captured my attention. And so it's probably going to be quite a small, tight scene or, an event. And I will move out from there and try to build a story around that. But it has to be that something that I have connected with, that I am interested in, that I want to learn a lot more about and spend a lot of time with, I suppose. Yeah.
I'd have to agree with that. I sort of zone in on the characters first because it can be so overwhelming. And I felt that with my other historical novel, A Great Escape, around the Berlin Wall. And there's been so much written about that. It just seems so huge. How could I tackle this? And it's been done so many times. So I had to really just focus on a very human story, on the character and their lives. And I think all of us do that. We zone in on the person first and have that overwhelming historical event as a backdrop. It's there looming over us, but I always start with that always. Otherwise I couldn't write it, I don't think, at all. I'd have to think about the person first and how they feel through it. I think someone said Mia, that quote was wonderful about novelists being able to find how they feel, how our characters feel.
Let me find the quote.
It was a great quote at the beginning of this.
It's E.L. Doctorow. The historian will tell you what happened, but the novelist will tell you what it felt like.
Yeah, so I always go back to that feeling, the feeling of the characters.
I would have to agree with that too. And I think starting with the person and carrying on all the way through, even though you do the research, and I want to represent everything in a historically accurate manner, what really interests me is how everything affects the individual. So of course, if I'm writing about a child during World War II going to school in Germany, I love all those details. And I think they're what really bring an era alive too, is when you pick those everyday things that kids today can relate to, like school and bedtime stories, and what did they have for dinner and what were their shoes like, and that they all bring an era alive too, because they're different for every era. So if you've got a child who's in wartime, and there's rationing and their shoes are worn out and they've got mismatched shoes or patch shoes, and their school hasn't even got enough wood to heat the room, so there's ice on the windows. To me, that really brings a setting alive too, that contrast between now what kids do and what there was then. So it's definitely with you guys that where it really comes alive is on that small personal level.
I guess it depends on the age of the person reading it too, though, you know, as a child reader, because as an adult reader, I could relate to all those skipping songs and rhymes and things that, you know, they were all the sort of things that we did as kids in our playground.
Yeah. But again, we're coming back to the playground and, well, what do children play today versus what children played them too? And I feel like it's a good link in for kids, isn't it, to compare and contrast? Yeah.
And I'm going to be for agreeing with what the three of you have said about it's through the eyes of the character. And so I do all the research and then sort of sit it on my shoulder, and a lot of it never sees the light of day, but it colours how my character experiences the world in which she lives. And I guess because this one was set in Melbourne, I could look at the city that I now know that I know very well, and I could just unpack the layers and take her down into that world to the things that are common. And I was looking at prejudice and racism and all of those things, and they're the same as they are now. And so a lot of what we put into our historical novels are not new ideas. They're not uncovering something that we've cured or fixed. They're often just looking at the cycles of things that we seem to continue to do, but they are through the eyes of a child or a young person. And the little details, like the things that are available and where the East Market was in Melbourne, they just help to ground the reader, even if they don't understand that they're being grounded in another reality.
Oh.
Jackie's raising a hand there. She has a question.
Is that okay to go ahead?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I don't have a big background in history, and yet whenever I read historical fiction, I'm always surprised at how much I enjoy it. So I guess my question would be, why history instead of modern day for your characters in your writing?
I'll start that one.
Okay.
One of the things that I really love about writing history is it stays the same. If you write contemporary stories, and they're amazing things, you've got to make a decision about whether you're going to use idiom and current political situations and descriptions, and do you put COVID in or do you not put COVID in, or do you think about who's winning the football, all of those things. Whereas if you go into history, it can't change. How we look at it can change, but the pillars of it, they stay the same. And that's reassuring in some ways when you're trying to write.
Good.
And I'm curious, and I love to learn. And when you've been writing for a long time, it's nice to learn something. I mean, we're always learning, but I love, and we always say the research is the hardest, but it's also the most fascinating for me anyway. I don't know for the others, I'm sure as well. And so that's why I keep coming back to it. I'm learning something all the time. And I often say that to the kids, you'll find answers in history. Just go back and look, as Claire said, it just comes around in circles. You can go back. I might show them something from the Spanish flu with kids wearing their masks, and they go, well, these kids were going through the same things as you were just going through in the last couple of years with COVID. And they could see that. They could see the link, and they go, right, okay, we can find answers perhaps.
I think for me, the excitement in... Oh, sorry, Alison.
No, you go.
I think for me, the excitement in telling story is to hope that you're telling something new to your audience. And the reason I started writing historical fiction is because I just stumbled across a story that was so new and interesting to me. I was really excited at the chance that it might be the first time that my readers had heard a story about that topic with the Wolfskinder, and the same with the other historical fiction I've written. I've tried to write about something that I think is a lesser known aspect of history, which is, as Felice says, it's really exciting and fun to research and be learning all those new things, and also to have our school child history challenged as well by what comes up all the time with new information, particularly since the Soviet Union's crumbled. I don't know about you other guys, but I finished my education when the Soviet bloc still existed. So point of views changed with history, accessibility to information. And so it's very exciting when you find a new story or something that's new to you and hopefully new to your readers. And so that might be something that's just squarely fantasy or adventure, or it might be history. So for me, it's about the excitement of telling the story.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for Mum, but I'm guessing it's pretty similar for her. But I think for me, I always am amazed at how you can show children that, I guess they feel that history is something that's so far in the past, but through fiction, you can really show them how personal it is, and how, people that lived hundreds and hundreds of years ago were really just like us in many, many ways. And, that we can have these really strong connections. I mean, at the moment, I'm actually reading Samuel Pepys's diaries for some research. And, the best bits are not the bits about what London was like then. It's the bits where he argues with his wife and and with the maid, and the really, really personal sort of heartfelt details, I suppose, of somebody's life and what it was really like to be alive then, and that, he was just the same as us in many ways. So for me, it's always about those really personal details that, that's what I love about it.
Jenny, I'm sorry.
I don't think there are any more questions. So I haven't seen any more hands being raised. So we might go on to the announcement, Mia.
I get to announce it.
Yes, you get to announce it.
No, it gives
Did
me
all the
great
hard work. Why not?
Well, thank you. It gives me great pleasure to, first of all, thank you all for joining us tonight and for writing such wonderful stories. Please continue to do them. I think one of the things that's convinced me this evening is that I think reading a historical book should almost be compulsory in a school, but that's me being possibly a bit too strong-minded. But anyway, for the winner of the 2023 BookLinks Children's Award for Children's Historical Fiction is Waiting for the Storks by Katrina Nannerstadt. We were amazingly impressed with the nuanced, layered writing, the difficult problem, the difficult program, the subject matter of the story, and how that was interwoven with such human and engaging characters. I could go on about it for a long time, as about all your books, but anyway, congratulations, Katrina.
And Katrina, would you like to say something?
That wasn't very
I would like
worded, but never mind.
Sorry, what was that, Mia?
I said that wasn't very elegantly worded, but I'm hoping that you will have a very elegantly worded response.
Oh, no pressure, Mia.
No.
Thank you. I really am really excited and delighted to win the award, and just want to thank BookLinks for creating this award. As you say, there's not much around for historical fiction, and I think it is a really important genre for children. Thanks to the judges too for spending the time. I know it takes a lot of time to read books, and I know you love reading books, but it still takes a lot of time and energy to read something with a view to judging it. I know that. So thank you for sharing your passion for literature and your insight and everything. And congratulations to the shortlisters. I know often it's just such a small margin between shortlisters and who gets the final prize, and there's just so much wonderful stuff being produced. I think, Mia, you've probably stolen my thunder. I was just going to say a few things about what I really love about historical fiction and why I do think it's so important. We do want our children to learn history, don't we?
Yeah,
and I think historical fiction actually gives children history, but it wraps it in a form that's really accessible to them. So it's entertaining, so they want to read it in the first place, hopefully, but also it's age appropriate. I think we've all written about things that are can be quite confronting, and I'm sure all of us have read things in our research that we wish we'd never been exposed to, and obviously we don't want children exposed to those things. So historical fiction is great because we can give children the history and we can deal with it honestly, but we temper and control the parts that are shown to children and put it in an appropriate way. And I think too, we're writing to an age group with this middle grade and beyond, where children are really ready to ponder big issues and look at the bigger world. And I think that's great that historical fiction gets them to do that. Other fiction can do that, but historical fiction can really look at big issues. And I think, Mia, was it you said this thing about making connections? You know, we want the children to make connections between what they know from history and what happens now. And I think that's a really powerful thing too. If we want our children to grow up to be informed about history, but also to be ready to be the leaders of the future, is to learn from history. I think we're all dealing with things in our stories that are really, really important issues that we want our kids to be ready to tackle as they go into leadership positions, don't they? So I hope I'm not beefing up historical fiction too much, but I think it's incredibly important. Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's fun. A lot of kids really love historical fiction, which creates engaged readers, which is, you know, we know that's good for all of us. So thank you so much for sponsoring this award that supports a genre that obviously we all are quite passionate about. And the matter awards like this, I think, really are a huge encouragement to writers. We work away in our little caves or hide under a rock most of the year, and it's really nice to pop out every now and again and know that the tears and the struggles and the fears and the terror have been worth it. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Katrina, for writing such a wonderful book, and thank you to all the writers of historical fiction, and particularly the ones present today. I really think you enrich the lives of all the children who read your books. Thank you. Can we have a round of applause, please, for all our wonderful writers?
And thank you, Mia. Thank you so much for leading this project for us.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
My pleasure.
Thank you.